We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Two wars, no problem, according to President Joe Biden in a recent 60 Minutes interview. Now, can America afford to invest in two overseas wars? Or is Joe Biden just trying to make the American public a lot more happy with handing over their hard-earned taxpayer dollars? To figure all that out, we're joined by Liberty Nation's economics editor, Mr. Andrew Moran. Thanks for joining us, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
So, Andrew, he said, of course we can afford it. We're America. Words to that effect. Really? Can America afford two overseas wars, of which, let's be fair, America is not even technically a participant?
Well, it's really a mixed messaging for the White House because he said that, but Janet Yellen also said, oh, of course America can afford all these wars. But then John Kirby was in front of reporters in the White House saying, this funding to Ukraine is not an open checkbook. You're going to be at the end of the rope. So what I gather is that at least some administration officials do believe that the U.S. cannot afford these wars. A $33.5 trillion national debt. How can you afford to extend yourself to the Middle East, to Eastern Europe, and potentially, if China invades Taiwan, to Asia? So the numbers don't add up to, the government can't even afford to keep its own doors open. It can't afford to fund other wars.
Yeah, it seems foolhardy to stick with the as long as it takes strategy in terms of spending. I mean, I get that you can say we're with you for as long as it takes, in terms of our support, in terms of perhaps our expertise, in terms of our intelligence sharing, things like this. But in terms of our cash, well, now I don't mean to sound like a stingy person in these things.
I do. I'm a stingy person.
But, the money that is going now, let's be clear, some of that money is actual cash. Not all of it is actual cash. And some of it is in terms of it's to get weaponry and armaments for essentially for nothing that will be paid back through government intervention into giving money to weapons sellers. Is that about right? Have I got that right?
Yes, yeah, that's correct. So part of it is our loans, others financial assistance, others humanitarian aid, and defense weapons. So the U.S. will hire some company, let's say General Dynamics, to manufacture tanks or armor defense vehicles, and then they ship off to that. So a few weeks ago, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, he said that the war in Ukraine is great for U.S. business, but it seems like also war in Israel is also good for U.S. defense business. Or again, if China invades Taiwan, that would also be good for U.S. defense business. It's this whole idea that was, I mentioned this on C5 recently, of the Frederick Bastiat essay in 1850, talking about the broken window fallacy, whereby the Keynesians or neocons or leftists will say that destruction is great for the economy because it creates a ripple effect throughout the marketplace where one party spends more and then that money goes to somebody else and that money goes to somebody else, without realizing that if the destruction didn't happen, then perhaps the U.S. government could do something better, like maybe paying down the national debt, balancing the books, doing something more productive.
Tax cuts, maybe. Tax cuts. That's something I know a lot of people are hoping for. So you have this situation where taxpayer dollars are now rushing out the door to two fronts. And as you rightly mentioned, there's this situation, there's the looming specter going across Europe. Oh, no, sorry, that's the first lines of the Communist Manifesto. There's the looming specter of China and Taiwan. That's possibly an expansion to another front. Also one in which the United States isn't necessarily a participant in that war. Like Ukraine is between Ukraine and Russia. And yes, I understand that there are further geopolitical implications to that. And I understand why it would be a benefit for Ukraine to win that conflict. But America's not involved in that war. Neither is my country, England. And Hamas and Israel. That's America is not involved in that war, and that would be the same between China and Taiwan. And so you have this money going out, and I think it's hard for the average person it's certainly hard for me. They don't come much more average than me. For people to justify why all of this money, when there's such destruction and degradation at home, why it's going overseas. How is the U.S. consumer feeling right now?
Well, the average consumer is not doing too well. You look at all the consumer sentiment index, and it's been weakening since the summer again. After recovering slightly in July, but since then it's just been on the downhill. If China were to invade Taiwan, you'd have inflationary implications just based on the semiconductor chips. Now, I don't know if you've been following this, but U.S. has recently renewed sanctions or heightened sanctions against China when it comes to artificial intelligence chips because China somehow and that company Huawei they were able to develop this impressive phone that had 5G chips and had 5G connections. So U.S. is so concerned that how could China do that? How could they circumvent all these sanctions? And still develop such technology. So I think that's part of the reasons why the West would be worried that China were to invade Taiwan because Taiwan has one of the biggest semiconductor chips in the world. Now China they've been trying to develop their own semiconductor manufacturing industry that counters Taiwan, but that's still far away from happening. So I guess the administration could say, well, consumers should be worried about China invading Taiwan because semiconductor, which are on everything from your smartphones to your automobiles, would go up dramatically in price. So I guess they're the inflation argument they would utilize.
But there's also other factors at play in terms of what will hit the consumer. I hate using the term consumer. I should never use that. The citizens, the people, and that's, for example, we had Iran talking to the Arab nations about putting an oil embargo on Israel. Now, surely that's going to impact everything back in the United States, right?
Potentially, I mean, Israel's not a massive consumer of oil, but perhaps it would be similar to the 1970s, where it would affect, let's say, the Arab country would vow to put, let's say, oil embargoes on the U.S. and Western allies. That would have more of an effect. But pretty much, I guess what would happen is if these countries would put an oil embargo on Israel, then the U.S. would redirect some of its exports to Israel, or other countries would redirect their shipments to Israel.
Because it's highly unlikely that Joe Biden would dip into the Strategic Petroleum Reserve I mean,
well, how could you? There's 17 days worth left of oil of this SPR. So how could you keep diving into that thing?
That's for next month's Joe Biden to worry about. This month's Joe Biden just needs all the help he can get. Now, Andrew, how can the U.S. keep funding all that's happening here?
Well, it can't. So recently, it's very...
And that's the end of the show. No, carry on.
Not a lot of people pay attention to this, of course, but I do. So if you look at the Treasury auctions recently, there's been such weakened investor demand for the 2-year bond, the benchmark 10-year bond, and a 30-year bond. Not a lot of people are scooping this up despite the 5% yield that's being offered on these Treasury notes. That's how the U.S. keeps the doors of Congress open by borrowing, by having people buy government debt and borrow all this money. On the second front, China keeps dumping its holdings of U.S. treasuries. So you're having weakened demand on the foreign front and also weakened demand in the private markets. So that's why I'm saying that the U.S. can't afford, the U.S. can't afford to fund these wars because it can't borrow any more money. Because in the third quarter, the U.S. Treasury issued about $1 trillion of debt. In the fourth quarter, the Treasury plans to issue another $800 billion. Who knows how much is going to issue in 2024? So when you have a $2 trillion deficit and you can't borrow any more money, the only thing you have left to do is just cut spending or inflate the money supply. And they're definitely not going to cut spending, so inflate the money supply is the only thing they have left.
Which basically impacts every dollar in the economy negatively, I guess. Andrew Moran, thank you ever so much for joining us on this. And if you want to find out more about the spending going on in the Ukraine and Israel fronts and how America can handle it, go and check out Andrew's recent Swamponomics TV video. It's excellent. I highly recommend you go and see it. Thanks, Andrew.
We dismiss history at our peril. Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. we believe in free thinking and free speech. We are LibertyNation.com.